Goldman Sachs is on an earnings call. Record revenue quarter, 5.33 billion in equities trading. And in the middle of the numbers, the CEO says a name. He says Claude Mythos. He says, "We have it. We're working with Anthropic." He said it in the way you'd announce a new division, not like a vendor, but a capability built into the institution's spine. And within hours, on another continent, the UK's AI Security Institute published what that capability actually is. The first AI model to complete a 32-step autonomous cyber attack simulation, chaining exploits that would take a human professional days. One system deployed for defense in New York, tested for offense in London. Same model, same day. So let's really look at that. David Solomon didn't mention Mythos in a sidebar, didn't whisper it to a journalist after the call. He said it on the record to analysts, investors, competitors, everyone. He described Goldman's relationship with Anthropic as active, ongoing, and accelerating. And he did it during a quarter when Goldman posted record results, which means this wasn't a crisis disclosure, but a strategic one. The bank wants people to know it has this. And the reason it wants people to know arrives from the UK AI Security Institute's assessment. AISI confirmed that Mythos succeeded at a 32-step attack simulation, tasks that would normally take human professionals days, in 3 out of the 10 attempts. And that's a lot, by the way. It seems small, but it's a lot. The Institute described it as a step up over previous models, capable of attacking small and weakly defended systems without human supervision. And then the kicker: future models will only improve, making, quote, investment now in cyber defense vital, close that quote. Remember the timeline here. April 8th, 6 days ago, Anthropic announced Project Glasswing, giving 40-plus organizations early access to Mythos for defensive scanning. On April 10th, the U.S. Treasury convened every major bank CEO. On April 13th, the UK's Bank of England, Financial Conduct Authority, Treasury, and the National Cybersecurity Center held emergency talks with banks and exchanges. And then yesterday, Solomon names the model on a public earnings call, while AISI publishes its independent evaluation. 6 days from restricted research preview to named institutional infrastructure on 2 continents. The Century Report tracked Anthropic's offensive cyber lead, estimating 6 to 12 months before comparable capability proliferates broadly, including from Chinese labs. And that was the April 12th edition, 2 days ago. Yesterday, Goldman's disclosure and AISI evaluation show the defensive side of that clock ticking just as fast. The organizations deploying Mythos are not waiting for the offensive tools to spread. They're building the walls while they still can, exactly where they think the attack will come from. And the same model is both the blueprint for the attack and the blueprint for the defense. And this is not a contradiction. It's how frontier capability seems to start working now. Offense and defense emerging from the same source, scaling together, forcing every institution to choose not whether to engage, but how fast. The UK's assessment said something that I want to make sure you really catch and sinks in. They said that Mythos can attack small, weakly defended systems without human help. Now that phrase, small, weakly defended, doesn't seem like it would account for much, that most of our security is well distributed and working properly. That's a lot of our assumption, right? That's actually not true. Small, weakly defended might be your local hospital network, the water utility in your county, every system that doesn't have Goldman Sachs security budget, for example. And that's exactly why the defensive build-out matters so urgently. The goal isn't to protect banks. Banks are already moving. The goal is to get this defensive capability spread wide enough and fast enough that the small systems, the ones you actually depend on that don't necessarily have the big budget, get hardened before the offensive tools reach everyone else. 6 to 12 months. That clock started ticking on April 8th. Shifting away here, though. While Goldman is publicly embracing Anthropic, something very different is happening inside OpenAI. Now, of course, consider the source, but this is still very important to fully understand the implications of. Denise Dresser, OpenAI's chief revenue officer, distributed an internal memo on Sunday that was public on Monday. 4 pages. The central claim was, Anthropic overstates its revenue by approximately $8 billion through accounting treatments that gross up revenue sharing agreements with Google and Amazon. In Dresser's telling, Anthropic's actual run rate is closer to 22 billion, not the 30 billion reported. OpenAI's own run rate sits at roughly 24 billion. So by Dresser's math, OpenAI is still ahead. Again, consider the source. But the revenue argument isn't what makes this memo extraordinary. It's the philosophical attack. Dresser characterized Anthropic's entire approach as, and this is a quote, built on fear, restriction, and the idea that a small group of elites should control AI. Close the quote there. She urged OpenAI to position itself as the democratic alternative, the open one, the platform that meets enterprises where they are. And she was very candid about OpenAI's structural challenges. She acknowledged that Anthropic holds a significant lead among enterprise customers through coding. She wrote that you do not want to be a single product company in a platform war, essentially describing Anthropic's Claude Code dominance as both a strength and a vulnerability. And she blamed the Microsoft partnership for limiting OpenAI's enterprise flexibility, positioning a newer Amazon alliance as the correction. So let's make sure the irony really lands here. On the same day that Goldman Sachs went public about working with Anthropic to protect the financial system, OpenAI's chief revenue officer was internally attacking Anthropic's philosophy and revenue claims, and the memo leaked within hours. That speed tells you something about the pressure inside that building. The RAMP corporate spending data from a couple of days ago showed that Anthropic is at 30.6% versus OpenAI's 35.2% among paying enterprise customers, with Anthropic projected to overtake within a month or two. Dresser's memo reads like a direct response to that trajectory, but the framing, calling safety commitments elitist restriction, while the entire financial system is racing to adopt the product those commitments built. That framing really collides with observable market behavior. The market isn't punishing safety so far. The market is choosing it. And the company that held its commitment under government pressure is the one that Goldman's CEO is naming now on its earnings calls. These two stories, Goldman embracing Anthropic and so many others embracing Anthropic, and OpenAI attacking Anthropic, they coexist in the same 24 hours. And they'll continue to coexist because the companies that are commercial rivals are also co-participants in Project Glasswing. They need each other for civilizational defense while competing for every enterprise contract. That is what we're dealing with now. Think about this. This is the genuine texture of this moment. There are no heroes and villains in this. There's cooperators and competitors, yes, and simultaneously so, with the boundaries blurring by the week. But think about what that actually means. This is a situation where civilizational defense is being questioned here. This is across the entire world, the entire civilization that we've got. That's what this technology is doing. So it is forcing enterprises, it is forcing the huge companies, all of the most elite people in the world, to renegotiate their own relationship with what that even means, because they have to start working together for civilizational defense. And at the same time, they're trying to defend their corporate interests. These are two things that do not go well together. This is going to be extremely interesting to see how that particular dynamic, that particular tension really plays out here in the next little while. All right, let's shift away. Pancreatic cancer has a 13% 5-year survival rate. That's the lowest of any major cancer. So if you or someone you love gets that diagnosis, the conversation with the oncologist is among the most difficult in medicine. Second-line treatment, which means the first approach didn't work, has historically offered very little, months, but not years. Yesterday, though, Revolution Medicines reported phase 3 results for, and I'll probably butcher this name, daraxonrasib. Patients who took this daily oral pill lived a median of 13.2 months. Patients on standard chemotherapy, 6.7 months. So that's a 60% reduction in the risk of death. The CEO called it unprecedented, and he wasn't exaggerating. No drug has ever shown an overall survival benefit greater than 1 year in phase 3 pancreatic cancer trial. And this targets something that oncologists have chased for decades now. About 90% of pancreatic cancers are driven by mutations in a family of genes called RAS. RAS has been one of medicine's most infamous, unsolvable problems understood for decades, untargetable until now. Researchers knew exactly what was driving the cancer. They just couldn't build a drug that could grab onto it. But daraxonrasib grabs onto it. And it does it as a pill you take at home, not an IV infusion at a cancer center, a pill. For a disease where quality of remaining life weighs enormously, shifting treatment from hours in a chair at an infusion center to a table with breakfast changes what those months feel like, not just how many there are. Dr. Shubham Pant of MD Anderson, who's been involved in daraxonrasib trials from the early stages, became visibly emotional describing what these results mean for the patients that he'd seen just that same day. Revolution Medicines plans to seek FDA approval using a Commissioner's National Priority Voucher for expedited review. The company's stock rose more than 30%, pushing its market value above $26 billion. Hold this result next to something that the Century Report covered back on March 23rd. A 4-marker blood test that detected pancreatic cancer in more than 90% of cases, including most early-stage tumors. Detection and treatment improving on the same disease and on converging timelines. Find it earlier, and today's report, treat it better when you do. For a cancer that has been among the cruelest diagnoses in medicine, both sides of the equation are shifting at once, and this is just the beginning. Okay, let's shift again. Pew Research Center published something yesterday that I think will redefine the next decade of American geography more than any political map. Of the more than 1,500 data centers currently in various stages of development across the U.S., 67% are sited in rural areas. Right now, 87% of the 3,000 plus operational data centers are urban, and 39% of planned sites are in counties that have 0 data centers today. Those numbers mean something. The physical infrastructure of the intelligence era is inverting its geography. It's migrating from cities into farm country, small towns, places where the land is cheap and the power lines are long. The South and Midwest account for 75% of planned construction. Georgia alone has 141 planned versus 94 existing. Indiana, 54 planned versus 38 existing. And the grid knows what's coming. PJM Interconnection, the nation's largest grid operator, serving 65 million people across 13 states, proposed yesterday a one-time backstop procurement of 14.9 gigawatts of new generation. For context, 14.9 gigawatts is roughly the output of 15 large nuclear plants. PJM's own projections show potential shortfalls of 50 to 60 gigawatts over the next decade, primarily driven by large load growth, meaning data centers. The Century Report has tracked the community side of this story across dozens of editions. Port Washington voting 2-1 to require voter approval before data center tax breaks, bestest voters ousting every incumbent council member over a data center deal, an Indianapolis council member's home struck by gunfire with a no data centers note. Yesterday's Pew data puts those local fights on a national map. 67% of the build-out is heading to communities where 87% of this technology has never been. The friction is inevitable, and it's also democracy working exactly as designed. Communities negotiating the terms on which transformative infrastructure enters their lives. What I think gets lost in both the booster narrative and the resistance narrative is what these facilities actually represent for rural economies. They bring tax revenue. They bring jobs. Construction first, operations after. They bring broadband upgrades and grid investments that serve the whole community, not just the data center. And they bring demands on water, land, and electrical capacity that constrain services designed for a different scale of use. All of those things are true at the same time. The governance challenge isn't stopping the build-out or accelerating it. It's building the institutional capacity county by county, grid region by grid region to absorb it on terms that work for the people who already live there. And then, of course, there's the open question of how necessary will these even be, considering the leaps forward in power and energy distribution that we've had recently. All right, let's talk about what shipped real quick. AMD launched a few days ago, actually, Gaia, which is a framework for building AI agents that run locally on AMD hardware. So documentation is live now. And Nous Research released Hermes Agent, version 0.9. This is a local web dashboard, fast mode, and stronger security hardening. 3 different on-ramps to running your AI locally and all shipping on the same day. Here's what we need to hold: an earnings call, a leaked memo, a clinical trial, and a census of where the machines will live. What stays with me is the simultaneity of Goldman's disclosure and OpenAI's attack. 2 reactions to the same company arriving on the same day, pointing in opposite directions. One says, "This is who we trust with our defenses," and the other says, "This is who we need to discredit." The market will have to choose, and it's already choosing. Very soon, watch for what the UK's Cross-Market Operational Resilience Group produces when it convenes in the next 2 weeks, because formal regulatory guidance for frontier AI in finance will set a template that crosses borders. Watch for whether Revolution Medicines gets that expedited FDA review, because the distance from phase 3 success to approved treatment is one of the last bottlenecks in the therapeutic compression arc. And pay attention to your own county's zoning meetings, because Pew just told you there's a 1 in 3 chance a data center is coming to a place that's never had one. We'll see you tomorrow.